My son tugged my sleeve before I could open the front door. His small hand gripped tight, harder than usual. "Dad, don't go in yet." I looked down at him. Tyler was 7 years old, still in his soccer cleats from practice, grass stains on his knees. His face was pale under the porch light. "What's wrong, buddy?" "Mom's been on the phone a lot. She stops talking when I walk in the room." I almost laughed it off. Almost told him grown-ups talk on the phone, that it was nothing. But something in his eyes stopped me. Tyler wasn't a kid who imagined things. He noticed everything, always had, ever since he was a toddler, counting the exact number of stairs in every building we entered. "She's hiding something, Dad. I don't know what, but I heard her crying in the bathroom last night, and when I asked her what was wrong, she said she was fine. But her eyes were red." I crouched down to his level, my knees cracking the way they do now that I'm 52. "Okay, I hear you. Let's just go inside like normal, all right? I'll figure it out." He nodded, but he didn't let go of my hand until we were both through the door. "My name is Daniel Cole. I've been married to Rachel for 11 years. We live in a modest 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. I work as a project manager at a construction firm, the kind of job where I leave before the sun is fully up and come home when it's already down. Rachel works part-time at a dental office 3 days a week. We built a life together that I always believed was steady. Not perfect, steady. That night, everything looked the same as it always did. Rachel was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of pasta sauce, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. She smiled when she saw me, the same smile she'd given me for over a decade. "Hey, how was work?" "Long," I said. "How was your day?" "Fine, quiet." I watched her face as she said it. Nothing seemed off. No tremor in her voice, no hesitation. But Tyler's words sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. We ate dinner together, the 3 of us, the way we did most nights. Rachel asked Tyler about his soccer practice. He answered in short sentences, glancing at me every few seconds like he was checking whether I remembered what he'd told me. I did. I hadn't forgotten a single word. After Tyler went to bed, I sat on the couch, pretending to watch the news while Rachel cleaned up the kitchen. I kept thinking about the way Tyler's hand had trembled when he grabbed my sleeve. Kids don't invent fear like that. Not without a reason. Around 10, Rachel's phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up quickly, glanced at the screen, and walked toward the laundry room instead of answering it in front of me. I didn't say anything. I just watched. She came back a few minutes later, phone tucked into her back pocket, and told me she was tired and going up to bed early. I told her I'd be up soon. I wasn't. I sat in the dark living room for almost an hour, replaying 11 years of marriage in my head, searching for cracks I might have missed. We'd had our hard seasons, the year after my father died, when I was distant and quiet for months. The year Rachel's mother got sick, when she carried more weight than any one person should carry alone. But we always came back to each other. That was who we were, or who I thought we were. It started raining that night, a slow, steady rain against the windows. I remember staring at the water running down the glass, thinking about how much easier it would be if I could just ask her directly. But something told me that wasn't the right move yet, not until I understood what I was even asking about. The next morning, I drove Tyler to school before work, like I always did on Tuesdays. He was quieter than usual in the back seat. "You okay?" I asked, glancing at him in the mirror. "Did you find anything out?" "Not yet. I will though, I promise." He nodded slowly. "She had another phone call this morning before you woke up. I heard her in the garage." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What did she say?" "I couldn't hear all of it, but she said something like he can't find out yet." Then she saw me and hung up fast. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. He can't find out yet. Those words followed me the entire drive to the office. Through 3 meetings I barely remember attending. Through lunch I didn't eat. By the time I got home that evening, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Rachel with accusations. I didn't have proof of anything, only a feeling, and feelings can be wrong. But I was going to pay attention, really pay attention in a way I probably hadn't in years, buried as I'd been in deadlines and budgets, and the routine exhaustion of daily life. That week, I noticed things I'd been too tired or too distracted to see before. Rachel started taking her phone into the bathroom when she showered. She began deleting her call history, something she'd never bothered with before. She grew short-tempered over small things, snapping at Tyler for leaving his shoes by the door. Something that never used to bother her. On Thursday night, I found an old photograph while looking for a phone charger in her nightstand drawer. It was a picture of Rachel with a man I didn't recognize, both of them younger, standing in front of a lake house I'd never seen. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written a date, 8 years ago, before Tyler was born, before we'd even talked about having kids. I stood there holding it, my heart pounding in a way I hadn't felt since basic training decades ago, when everything in your body tells you something important is about to happen and you don't know if you're ready. I put the photograph back exactly where I found it. I didn't say anything to Rachel that night. I wasn't ready. I needed to understand more before I said a single word. Friday morning, Tyler found me in the garage before school, checking the oil in my truck just to have something to do with my hands. Dad. His voice was small. I found something too. I turned to face him. What did you find, bud? He reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper, wrinkled like it had been hidden and unhidden several times. It was in Mom's coat pocket. I wasn't looking for it. I was just getting my glove back, the one she borrowed for me last weekend. I took the paper from his small hands. My fingers were shaking slightly as I unfolded it. It was a receipt, a hotel receipt, dated 3 weeks earlier, for a night Rachel had told me she was staying late at her sister's house helping with a home renovation project. I read it twice, then a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less painful. Dad, Tyler's voice pulled me back. Are you mad at me for taking it? I knelt down and pulled him into a hug, holding him tighter than I probably should have. No, you did the right thing telling me. You did exactly the right thing. But inside, something in me was breaking apart, piece by piece. The way ice cracks under weight you didn't know was there until it's already too late. That afternoon, everything changed in a way I never expected. I got a call from Rachel while I was still at work. Her voice tight and strange. Daniel, I need you to come to the hospital. It's my mother. She collapsed at home. I dropped everything and drove straight there. The receipt still folded in my jacket pocket. The question still burning in my chest. All of it pushed aside by a new kind of fear. When I arrived, Rachel was standing outside the ICU doors, her face streaked with tears, more emotion than I'd seen from her in months. And standing beside her, with his hand resting gently on her shoulder in a way that made my blood run cold, was the same man from the old photograph. He looked older now, gray at the temples, but it was unmistakably him. Rachel turned when she saw me, her eyes widening with something between guilt and panic. Daniel, she said quickly, this is. I held up my hand before she could finish, my voice quieter and steadier than I expected it to be. I know who he is. The hallway went silent except for the distant beeping of hospital machines and the low murmur of nurses down the corridor. Rachel's mouth opened, then closed again. The man beside her shifted uncomfortably, his hands slowly dropping from her shoulder. I looked at both of them standing there under the harsh hospital lights, 11 years of marriage, suddenly feeling like a story I'd only half understood. We need to talk, I said. Tonight. Everything. Rachel nodded slowly, tears still falling, but she didn't argue. I turned and walked toward the waiting room chairs, my legs unsteady beneath me, my son's warning echoing in my mind the way it had all week. Dad, don't go home tonight. She's hiding something. He'd been right. I just didn't yet know how right or how deep this went, or what waited for me on the other side of the conversation I was about to have. My hands were shaking as I sat down in the plastic waiting room chair. I set them on my knees to steady them, but it didn't help much. Rachel walked over slowly and sat 2 chairs away from me, leaving space between us, like she wasn't sure she'd earned the right to sit closer. The man from the photograph stood near the window, arms crossed, staring out at the parking lot like he wanted to disappear into it. Daniel, Rachel said quietly, it's not what you think. You don't know what I think. My voice came out flatter than I intended. You don't know what I found. Her eyes flickered with fear. What did you find? I pulled the folded hotel receipt from my jacket pocket and held it out to her. She took it with trembling fingers, unfolded it, and closed her eyes the moment she recognized what it was. That's from 3 weeks ago, I said. The night you told me you were at your sister's helping with the renovation. She didn't answer right away. The silence stretched long enough that I could hear the hallway clock ticking somewhere behind the nurse's station. His name is Marcus, she finally said, nodding toward the man by the window. We knew each other a long time ago, before you and I met. I saw the photograph too, in your nightstand. 8 years ago, before Tyler. Her face went pale. You've been going through my things? I wasn't looking for anything. I was looking for a phone charger. I kept my voice low, aware of where we were, aware that people in white coats were walking past us every few minutes. Rachel, our son told me something was wrong almost a week ago. He noticed before I did. My 7-year-old noticed before I did. She pressed her hand over her mouth, tears sliding down her cheeks again, though I couldn't tell anymore if they were for her mother in the ICU or for the conversation happening in front of me. It's not an affair, she said finally. Not the way you're imagining it. Then tell me what it is, because right now I'm imagining the worst version. Marcus stepped away from the window and walked closer, though he stopped a respectful distance away. Daniel, I can explain some of this if you'll let me. I looked at him, this stranger who apparently wasn't a stranger to my wife at all. Go ahead. Rachel's mother, Diane, has been sick for a while, longer than you probably know. Her heart condition. She's needed help, financial help, more than Rachel's income could cover, and she didn't want to put that on you. I turned to Rachel. Why wouldn't you tell me that? Why would you hide something like that from me? Because you already carry so much, Rachel said, her voice breaking. Between your job and everything with your own father when he was sick, I didn't want to add this weight onto you too. I thought I could handle it myself, by meeting an old boyfriend at a hotel. Her face crumpled. It wasn't romantic, Daniel. Marcus works in medical billing. He's been helping me sort out my mother's insurance claims, fighting with the hospital over coverage denials. That night was because we had an early morning meeting with a claims adjuster 2 hours away. It made more sense to stay over than drive back and forth. I wanted to believe her. Part of me did. But 11 years of trust doesn't rebuild itself in a hospital hallway with a single explanation, no matter how reasonable it sounds. Why not just tell me all of this from the beginning? I asked. Why the secrecy? Why deleting your call history? Why crying in the bathroom where you thought no one could hear you? Rachel wiped her face with the back of her hand. Because I was ashamed. My mother's finances are a mess, Daniel. She never planned for anything, and I felt like if I told you the full truth, you'd see my family the way you saw your own, like a burden you had to carry. That stung more than I expected it to. My father had been sick for 2 years before he passed, and I remembered exactly how heavy that period had felt, how much of myself I'd poured into caregiving and hospital visits and impossible medical bills. Rachel had been there for all of it, steady and patient, never once complaining. I never made you feel like a burden, I said. Did I? She hesitated, which told me more than words could have. You got quiet, Daniel. For almost a year after your dad died, you barely spoke about anything difficult. I didn't want to become another difficult thing you had to carry in silence. I sat with that for a long moment, the weight of it settling somewhere deep in my chest. Maybe I had built walls without realizing it. Maybe grief had made me harder to reach than I understood at the time. But that still didn't explain everything. The photograph, I said. 8 years old, before we even had Tyler. Marcus spoke again, his voice careful. That was taken the summer before Rachel and I ended things. We were together for almost 3 years before she met you. I think she kept it because it was one of the last good memories from that chapter of her life, not because of anything else. Rachel nodded slowly. I should have thrown it away a long time ago. I know how it looks. I know it looks terrible, but it wasn't hidden because I still had feelings for him. It was hidden because I didn't want a random reminder from my past sitting out where anyone could ask questions about it. I studied her face, searching for any sign of deception, any crack that might reveal a lie beneath the explanation. I didn't find one, but I also didn't fully trust my own judgment anymore, not after realizing how much I had missed. A nurse walked out from the ICU doors and approached us. Family for Diane Whitfield? Rachel stood immediately. That's me, I'm her daughter. She's stable for now. You can see her, but only 2 visitors at a time, and please keep it brief. She needs rest. Rachel looked back at me, uncertainty written across her face, as if she wasn't sure whether I would even want to go in with her. Go ahead, I said quietly. I'll wait out here. She nodded and disappeared through the doors with the nurse, leaving me alone in the waiting room with Marcus, the man whose presence had unraveled a week's worth of suspicion into something far more complicated than I'd imagined. Marcus sat down a few chairs away, giving me space but not leaving entirely. For what it's worth, he said after a moment, Rachel talks about you and your son constantly. Every conversation somehow circles back to Tyler's soccer games or something you said that made her laugh. I know this looks bad. I know what you must have been thinking this past week, but she loves you. That much I know for certain, even after everything. I didn't respond right away. Trust wasn't something Marcus could hand back to me with a few reassuring words, even well-intentioned ones. Why didn't she just tell me the truth from the start? I asked, more to myself than to him. Pride, maybe. Fear. Sometimes people convince themselves that protecting someone means keeping them in the dark, even when it's the opposite of what actually helps. He paused. I made that mistake once myself a long time ago with someone I loved. It cost me more than I want to admit. I sat with his words, staring down at the hospital floor tiles, gray and worn from thousands of footsteps belonging to people whose lives had all cracked open in this same building at some point or another. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from the babysitter watching Tyler. He wants to know if Dad found out the truth yet. He says it's important. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Tell him I'm working on it. Tell him he did good. Rachel came back out 20 minutes later, her eyes red and swollen, but calmer than before. She's stable. The doctor says it was a minor cardiac event, not a full heart attack, but they want to keep her for observation over the next few days. That's good, I said. I'm glad she's okay. Rachel sat down beside me this time, closer than before. Daniel, I know I have a lot of explaining left to do. I know trust doesn't just come back because I gave you a few answers in a hospital hallway. But I need you to know that Marcus and I, there's nothing there. There hasn't been in years. I made mistakes in how I handled all of this, but I never crossed a line with him. I looked at her, searching for the woman I married 11 years ago, the woman who used to leave little notes in my lunch bag during the early years of our marriage, back when we were young enough to believe love alone could carry us through anything. I want to believe you, I said honestly, but I need more than words right now. I need to see the whole picture, all of it. No more hidden phone calls, no more deleted messages, no more secrets tucked into coat pockets for our son to find. Her eyes widened slightly. Tyler found something? He found the receipt. He's the reason I even knew to look. Rachel closed her eyes, a fresh wave of shame washing over her face. He shouldn't have had to carry that. He's 7 years old, Daniel. He shouldn't be the one uncovering secret in this family. No, I agreed quietly. He shouldn't have, but he did. And now we have to figure out how to fix what he saw, not just between us, but for him too. We sat there together in silence for a while, two people who had built a life together, now facing the uncomfortable work of rebuilding trust from a foundation that had cracked more than either of us realized. Rachel's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and something shifted in her expression, a tightening around her eyes that hadn't been there a moment before. "What is it?" I asked. She hesitated before turning the phone toward me. It was a text from an unknown number. "I know what you're hiding from your husband. If you don't tell him yourself by Friday, I will." My stomach dropped. "Who sent that?" Rachel's hands were shaking as she stared at the screen. "I don't know. I don't recognize this number at all." A cold realization settled over me as I looked at those words again. Whatever secrets Rachel had been keeping, it seemed someone else already knew about them, and they weren't going to stay quiet much longer. Rachel handed me the phone like it was something dangerous, her fingers trembling. I read the message 3 more times, trying to make sense of it. "You said you didn't recognize the number," I said slowly. "But you know what it's talking about." She didn't answer at first. Marcus had gone quiet in his chair, watching us both with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between concern and guilt. "Rachel." My voice was firmer now. "What else is there?" She stood up and walked a few steps away, wrapping her arms around herself the way she did when she was cold or scared, and right now I suspected it was both. "There's something about my mother's finances I haven't told you, something bigger than medical bills. Tell me now. No more waiting, no more explaining it later. Now." She turned back to face me, and for the first time that night I saw real fear in her eyes, not fear of losing me, but fear of something else entirely. "My mother borrowed money," she said. "A lot of money, not from a bank. From a man named Eddie Ruiz, someone Marcus knew from years ago through a contact at his old job. It wasn't a legitimate loan, Daniel. It came with interest rates that made no sense, the kind of terms only desperate people agree to." My chest tightened. "How much?" $40,000. maybe more now with the interest. I felt the floor tilt slightly beneath me. $40,000, and you knew about this. I found out 3 months ago, when my mother finally broke down and told me she couldn't make the payments anymore. She'd been skipping meals to make the minimum, Daniel. Skipping her own medication some months to keep this man from showing up at her door again. Showing up at her door, I repeated. You mean he threatened her? Rachel nodded, tears sliding freely now. Not directly, not at first, but there were phone calls. Late at night. Someone parked outside her house for hours at a time. She was terrified, and she made me promise not to tell you, because she was ashamed, and because she was afraid of what might happen if word got out. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low. I've been trying to help negotiate the debt down, get Eddie to accept a smaller lump sum instead of the ongoing payments. That's what the hotel stay was for. We drove out to meet with a mediator 2 hours from here, someone who specializes in these kinds of predatory loan situations. I sat there absorbing all of it, the picture finally coming into full focus, more complicated and more frightening than I had imagined even in my worst moments this past week. And the text message, I said. You think it's from this Eddie person? Rachel wiped her eyes. I don't know. It could be him. It could be someone connected to him. He's done this before, Daniel, used pressure and threats to get people to pay faster. I stood up and walked to the window at the end of the hallway, staring out at the parking lot below, rain still falling steadily against the glass. Somewhere out there was a man who had been threatening my wife's mother for months, and my wife had been carrying that weight entirely alone, terrified to tell me, terrified I'd see her family as a burden the way she believed I already saw everything difficult. Why didn't you just tell me? I asked, not turning around. We could have gone to the police. We could have found a real solution together, instead of you sneaking around trying to fix this by yourself. Because I know how you are with money, Daniel. I know how careful you've always been, how much you worry about our savings, Tyler's college, fund our future. I didn't want to ask you to risk any of that for a debt my mother took on without even asking me first. That's not your decision to make alone, I said, turning back to face her. We're married. Whatever happens to your family happens to our family. That includes the hard parts, not just the easy ones. Rachel's shoulders sagged, some of the fight going out of her. I know that now. I think I always knew it, somewhere underneath the fear. I just didn't know how to say the words out loud without feeling like I was failing you. My phone buzzed again, another text from the babysitter. Tyler wants to know if you're coming home soon. He says he can't sleep until he knows everything is okay. Something in that message steadied me, gave me a clearer sense of what mattered most in that moment. Whatever else was happening, my son was waiting at home, carrying worry no 7-year-old should have to carry. We need to go home, I said. Tyler needs to see both of us together tonight. He needs to know this family isn't falling apart, even if we still have a lot to work through. Rachel nodded, wiping her face one more time before straightening her posture. You're right, I'll stay with my mother a little longer tomorrow, but tonight Tyler comes first. Marcus stood as well, adjusting his jacket. I should get going, Daniel. For what it's worth, I know this is a lot to process at once, but everything I did was to help Rachel protect her mother, nothing more. I studied him for a long moment. I appreciate you telling me the truth tonight, but I think it's best if going forward, any conversations about this situation happen with me involved directly. No more meetings I don't know about. He nodded without argument. That's fair. He left down the hallway, and Rachel and I stood alone for a moment, before walking toward the parking garage together, the rain finally beginning to ease into a light drizzle. We drove home in separate cars, but when we pulled into the driveway at nearly the same time, something about seeing her headlights behind mine in the rearview mirror felt like the first honest moment of the whole night. Two people still choosing to come home to the same place, despite everything. Tyler was still awake when we walked through the door, sitting on the stairs in his pajamas, the babysitter looking apologetic behind him. He wouldn't go to bed, she said. He kept saying he needed to see you both. Tyler ran down the last few steps and wrapped his arms around my waist, then reached for Rachel's hand, pulling us both toward him like he needed physical proof that we were still a family standing in the same room. Is everything okay? He asked, looking up at me with wide, serious eyes. Did you find out what Mom was hiding? I knelt down to his level, glancing at Rachel, who nodded slightly, giving me permission to speak honestly. Yeah, buddy, I found out. It's a hard situation, but we're going to fix it together. As a family. Is Mom in trouble? No, Rachel said softly, kneeling down beside me. I made some mistakes by keeping secrets, and I'm sorry for that. But your dad and I are going to handle this together now. You don't have to worry anymore. Tyler looked between us for a long moment, his young face processing more than any child his age should have to process. You promise you're not getting a divorce? The question hit me harder than I expected. I promise, I said firmly. Your mom and I have some work to do, but we're not going anywhere. Not from each other, and definitely not from you. He nodded slowly, seeming to accept the answer, though I could tell part of him was still holding on to worry he didn't have words for. After we finally got Tyler settled into bed, Rachel and I sat together at the kitchen table, the house quiet around us except for the hum of the refrigerator and the last patter of rain against the window. We need a real plan, I said, for your mother's debt, for this Eddie person, all of it. Rachel nodded, pulling a folder from her bag, one I hadn't noticed her carrying before. Inside were bank statements, loan documents, and handwritten notes, tracking every payment her mother had made over the past several months. I've been keeping track of everything, she said, in case we ever needed proof, in case this ever went further than late-night phone calls. I looked through the documents, my stomach turning at the predatory interest rates outlined on the page, numbers that made it clear Diane had been trapped in a cycle designed to be impossible to escape. This isn't just a personal debt issue, I said slowly. This looks illegal. Loan sharking, harassment, maybe worse. Rachel's eyes widened. You think we should go to the police? I think we need to talk to someone who understands these laws better than we do. A lawyer, at minimum. Maybe law enforcement too, depending on what they tell us. Before Rachel could respond, my phone buzzed on the table between us. Neither of us reached for it right away, both of us staring at the screen as it lit up with a new message from the same unknown number as before. Tell your husband everything, or I'll make sure everyone in your life knows exactly what kind of family you really are. Rachel's face drained of color as she read the words over my shoulder. Daniel, she whispered, I think this is about more than just the money. I stared at the message, reading it a second time, then a third. Everyone in your life knows exactly what kind of family you really are. That wasn't the language of a debt collector chasing a payment. That was something else, something personal. What does that mean? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. What kind of family? What is he talking about? Rachel's hands were pressed flat against the kitchen table, like she needed something solid to keep herself steady. I don't know, Daniel. I swear to you, I don't know what he means by that. You said Eddie Ruiz was a loan shark, a debt collector. This doesn't sound like collections language. This sounds like someone trying to expose something. She shook her head slowly, but I could see something shifting behind her eyes, some memory surfacing that she wasn't ready to say out loud yet. Rachel. I reached across the table and took her hand. Whatever it is, I need you to tell me now. I can't keep finding pieces of this one at a time, not after tonight. She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at our joined hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. It's not about me, Daniel. It's about my mother. Something that happened a long time ago, before I was even born. What are you talking about? When my mother married my father, she wasn't his first wife. He was married before to a woman named Carol. They had a son together, my half-brother. His name is Peter. I sat back in my chair, stunned. In 11 years of marriage, Rachel had never once mentioned a half-brother. You have a brother? Rachel, why would you never tell me this? Because I've never met him. My father left Carol and Peter when Peter was only 3 years old. He remarried my mother a year later, and we never spoke about that part of his life. It was like it never happened, at least in our house. So what does this have to do with Eddie Ruiz? With these threats? Rachel took a shaky breath. My father passed away 4 years ago, before you and I even met his side of the extended family at all. When he died, he left everything to my mother and me. Nothing to Peter. Not a single mention of him in the will. Understanding began to settle over me, cold and heavy. You think Peter is behind this? I think it's possible. My mother mentioned once, a long time ago, that Peter had reached out to her after Dad's funeral, angry, saying he deserved something from the estate too. She never told me any details. She just said she handled it and asked me not to bring it up again. I pulled out my phone and looked again at the threatening message, then scrolled up to the earlier one Rachel had received in the hospital hallway. If this is Peter, then this was never really about a debt to Eddie Ruiz at all. Or maybe it's connected somehow. Maybe Eddie Ruiz isn't just a random loan shark. Rachel's eyes widened with sudden realization. Marcus said Eddie was a contact from his old job. What if Peter is the one who introduced my mother to Eddie in the first place? What if this was never really a loan at all, but some kind of setup to drain her savings out of resentment? The pieces were falling into place in a way that made my stomach turn. We need to talk to your mother directly. Tomorrow, first thing. She needs to tell us everything. No more protecting people who clearly aren't protecting her. The next morning, we drove to the hospital together, dropping Tyler at school on the way, though he asked more questions than usual, sensing that something significant was unfolding, even if he didn't understand the full shape of it yet. Diane was sitting up in her hospital bed when we arrived, looking frail but more alert than the night before. Her face tightened with worry the moment she saw both our expressions. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Has something happened?" Rachel sat down beside the bed and took her mother's hand gently. "Mom, I need you to tell us about Peter. All of it. No more secrets." Diane's face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks almost instantly. "Why are you asking about him?" I stepped closer. "Because someone has been sending threatening messages to Rachel's phone, and we think it might be connected to him. We need to understand what happened after your husband's funeral." Diane was quiet for a long moment, her eyes drifting toward the window, towards some memory she'd clearly been avoiding for years. "Peter came to me about 6 months after the funeral," she finally said. "He was angry, said his father owed him something, that being cut out of the will wasn't fair, no matter what happened between his parents all those years ago." "What did you do?" Rachel asked. "I gave him some money. Not much at first, just enough to help him get back on his feet. He'd lost his job around that time, and despite everything, he was still my husband's son. I felt some responsibility toward him." Diane's voice grew unsteady, but it didn't stop there. "He kept coming back asking for more, and eventually I couldn't keep giving him money out of my own savings without you noticing." So you borrowed from Eddie Ruiz instead," I said quietly. Diane nodded, tears slipping down her weathered cheeks. "Peter introduced me to him. Said Eddie could give me a private loan. No paperwork, no bank involved. I didn't understand at the time how predatory the terms would become. I just wanted to keep helping Peter without burdening either of you with the truth." Rachel's hands were shaking now. "Mom, this whole time, Peter has been taking money from you, using guilt and family obligation to drain your savings, and setting you up with a loan shark to keep the money flowing even after you couldn't afford to give him more directly." "I didn't want to believe that," Diane whispered. "He's family, even if we barely know him. I thought maybe helping him would finally bring us closer, make up for what his father did all those years ago." I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest, not at Diane, who had clearly been manipulated by guilt and grief, but at Peter, a man I'd never met who had exploited his own father's widow for years while hiding behind claims of fairness and inheritance. "Where does Peter live now?" I asked. "Do you have any way to contact him directly?" Diane reached for her purse on the bedside table and pulled out a worn business card. "He gave me this a while back. Some kind of consulting job, though I never fully understood what he does." I took the card and read the name printed across it. Peter Whitfield, Financial Consulting Services. Rachel looked at the card over my shoulder, her expression hardening into something I hadn't seen from her before, a mixture of hurt and fierce protectiveness. Financial consulting. That's almost funny, considering what he's actually been doing to this family. "We need to talk to a lawyer," I said. "Today, if possible, someone who specializes in elder financial abuse and predatory lending. This isn't something we can handle by ourselves anymore." By early afternoon, we sat in the office of an attorney named Susan Park, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm, measured way of speaking that immediately put me at ease, despite the chaos of the past 24 hours. She listened carefully as Rachel and I laid out everything: the loan documents, the threatening messages, Diane's account of Peter's manipulation over the past 4 years. "This is a clear pattern of financial exploitation," Susan said, flipping through the paperwork Rachel had brought. Combined with the predatory loan terms from this Eddie Ruiz individual, we're looking at potential criminal charges, not just a civil dispute over inheritance. What about the threatening texts? I asked. Can we trace those back to Peter? Possibly, with the right subpoenas for phone records. But I'd recommend documenting everything meticulously starting now. Every message, every call, every payment your mother-in-law has made. We'll build a case methodically. Rachel's phone buzzed again on the table between us. She glanced down, her face tightening as she read the screen. "It's him," she said quietly. Another message. She turned the phone so I could see it. "Meet me tonight, alone, or I go public with everything about this family, and your mother loses more than just money." Susan leaned forward, her expression sharpening. "Do not meet him alone. Whatever else happens, that would be extremely unwise, especially given what we now know about his behavior pattern." I looked at Rachel, watching the fear and anger mixing behind her eyes, and felt a fierce protectiveness rise up in my own chest. The same instinct I'd felt every time Tyler needed defending against anything in this world that threatened to hurt him. "We're not meeting him alone," I said firmly. "But we are meeting him, together, with a plan this time, not secrets." Susan Park held up a hand before either of us could say more. "If you're going to meet him, it needs to be controlled. Public location, recorded conversation where legally permitted, and ideally law enforcement aware of the meeting beforehand, even if they're not standing beside you. Ohio's a one-party consent state for recording conversations," she added, glancing at her notes. "So you can record it legally as long as one person in the conversation, meaning you, consents. But let's still loop in the police first. If this man has been running a coordinated scheme with a predatory lender, that's worth a detective's attention before you ever sit across from him." Rachel nodded slowly, her fingers still gripping the phone. "Okay, whatever keeps my mother safe and keeps this from touching Tyler any more than it already has." We spent the next hour with Susan drafting a plan. She connected us with a detective she'd worked with before, a woman named Detective Ramos who specialized in financial crimes against the elderly. Ramos listened to our account over the phone, asked sharp, specific questions, and agreed to have an unmarked car nearby when we met Peter, along with a small recording device Rachel would carry. That evening, Rachel texted Peter back, "Fine, diner on Route 9, tomorrow at noon, public place." His reply came fast, "Good, bring the money or bring the truth, your choice." The next day felt impossibly long. I dropped Tyler at school, told him only that Mom and I had a meeting about Grandma's situation. Careful not to frighten him with details he didn't need yet, he studied my face for a long moment before hugging me tighter than usual. "You'll tell me everything's okay after, right? I promise." At noon, Rachel and I walked into the diner together. Peter was already seated in a corner booth, a thin man in his late 30s with our shared father's sharp jawline, though nothing else about him resembled the photographs I'd seen of Diane's late husband. He looked tired, restless, his leg bouncing under the table. "You brought him," Peter said, nodding at me without much interest. "Didn't expect that." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, sliding into the booth across from him, Rachel beside me. "Whatever you have to say, you say it to both of us." Peter's jaw tightened. "This isn't about you. This is about what's owed to me." "Owed to you," Rachel repeated, her voice steady, despite the tremor I could see in her hands beneath the table. "You've taken over $60,000 from our mother over 4 years, Peter. Through guilt, through manipulation, and through a predatory loan you personally arranged with Eddie Ruiz. What exactly do you think is still owed?" Peter's eyes flashed with something between anger and desperation. "My father left me nothing, not $1, after everything that happened. Do you know what it's like growing up without a father, watching him build a whole new life, with a whole new family, while I got nothing?" "That's between you and your father," I said quietly. "Diane didn't do that to you. She spent years trying to help you, even when it cost her everything." "Help me?" Peter's laugh was bitter, sharp. "She gave me scraps out of guilt. I deserved half of everything in that will, and instead I got a woman feeding me just enough to keep me quiet." Rachel leaned forward, her voice low but fierce. "She's in the hospital right now, Peter, because of the stress you've put her under, because of the loan you set her up with, the payments that made her skip her own heart medication. Do you understand what you've done to her?" For a moment, something flickered across Peter's face, a crack in the anger, something that almost looked like guilt. but it vanished quickly, replaced by defensive hardness. I didn't force her to take that loan. You introduced her to a loan shark, I said. Knowing exactly what those terms would do to a woman on a fixed income. That's not innocent, Peter. That's exploitation. He shifted in his seat, glancing toward the door as if considering leaving. What do you want from me? We want it to stop, Rachel said. No more calls, no more threats, no more Eddie Ruiz. And you're going to help us document everything that happened, every payment, every threat, so we can make sure this never happens to anyone else. You want me to confess, Peter said flatly. To criminal charges. We want the truth, I said. What happens after that depends on how honest you're willing to be right now. Peter sat in silence for a long moment, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long gone cold. When he finally spoke again, his voice had lost some of its hard edge. I never wanted it to go this far, he said quietly. Eddie offered easy money, said it was a simple arrangement, that Diane would barely notice the payments at first. I told myself I deserved a piece of what should have been mine, but then the interest kept growing, and Eddie kept pressuring me to keep the payments coming, and I didn't know how to stop it without admitting what I'd done. Rachel's expression softened slightly, though her guard remained firmly in place. You could have just talked to us, Peter. Instead of all this, would you have listened? A brother you never knew showing up asking for money? He shook his head. I didn't think there was another way. There's always another way, I said. But you have to choose it before things spiral this far out of control. Detective Ramos approached the table a few minutes later, having been seated at the counter the entire time, close enough to observe without drawing attention. She identified herself quietly, and within the hour, Peter had agreed to cooperate with the investigation into Eddie Ruiz's lending practices in exchange for leniency regarding his own involvement. It wasn't a perfect resolution. Peter still faced consequences for his part in exploiting his stepmother, but his cooperation helped authorities build a much stronger case against Eddie Ruiz, who it turned out had run similar predatory schemes against at least 6 other elderly victims across the county. Over the following months, the case slowly worked its way through the legal system. Eddie Ruiz was arrested and charged with predatory lending and elder financial exploitation. Diane's debt was voided entirely once the illegal nature of the loan was established in court. Peter received probation and mandatory financial counseling, along with a court order to repay a portion of what he'd taken, a small measure of justice, though not one that erased the years of stress he'd caused. Diane recovered slowly, both physically and emotionally, moving in with us for several months while she regained her strength. Tyler took to having his grandmother in the house immediately, spending afternoons teaching her card games and proudly showing her his soccer trophies. One evening, several months after everything had settled, we sat together around the dinner table. All 4 of us, Diane included, sharing a meal the way we hadn't in longer than I could remember. Tyler looked up from his plate at one point, studying my face with the same serious expression he'd worn the night he first warned me at the front door. Dad, are we okay now? Like, really okay? I reached over and squeezed his shoulder. Yeah, buddy, we're really okay, because I was really scared that night. When I told you not to go home, Rachel reached across the table and took his other hand. You were the bravest one in this whole family, Tyler. You saw something was wrong before any of the adults did, and you told the truth, even when it was hard. That took real courage. He smiled, a little shy but clearly proud, the tension I'd seen carried in his small shoulders for weeks finally beginning to ease. Later that night, after Tyler had gone to bed, and Diane had retired to the guest room, Rachel and I sat together on the back porch, the quiet hum of crickets filling the warm evening air. I keep thinking about how close we came to losing all of this, Rachel said softly. Not just because of Peter or the debt, but because I let fear keep me from telling you the truth. I thought protecting you meant carrying it alone. I understand why you did it, I said. But we're stronger when we carry things together. That's something I think we both needed to relearn. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the tightness in my chest finally begin to loosen. Thank you for not giving up on us. Even when you had every reason to, we built something worth fighting for, I said. I wasn't about to let it fall apart without trying everything I could first. We sat there together in comfortable silence, watching the stars slowly appear over the backyard, A family that had been tested and had come through it, not unscathed, but stronger and more honest than before. Looking back now, I think about how easily I could have dismissed my son's warning that night at the front door, how easily fear and busyness could have kept me from paying attention. But he saw what I couldn't, and he trusted me enough to speak up even when it frightened him. Sometimes the people who love most are the ones gone brave enough to tell us the truth, even when it's the hardest thing in the world to say. My son taught me that lesson at 7 years old, standing on our front porch in the rain, refusing to let me walk into something without knowing the full picture first. I've never forgotten it since.